good man. I think he ought to be a senator in this country. Which brings me to my book, Financial Terrorism, Hijacking America Under the Threat of Bankruptcy. The thrust of my book is very simple. The debt is deliberate. The interim goal is financial panic. The long-range goal is a world monetary system under the United Nations and world government. That's my book in a nutshell. Along the way, in my book, we give statements of prominent members of the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations to back it up. As far back as 1970, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who happens to belong to both of these organizations, said, more intensive efforts to shape a new world monetary structure will have to be undertaken with some consequent risk to the presently relatively favorable American position. Okay? A few years later, Paul Volcker of the Federal Reserve said, the standard of living of the average American has to decline. I don't think you can escape that. And he proceeded to help it decline. Richard N. Cooper, professor, CFR, trilateral member, 1984, he said, but a single currency is possible only if there is in effect a single monetary policy and a single authority issuing currency and directing monetary policy. How can independent states accomplish that? They need to turn over the determination of monetary policy to a supranational body. They tell us what they're going to do. C. Fred Bergston, 1989, again, CFR, trilateral. The world economy is in trouble unless there is some central steering mechanism. What they want for our world is a world Federal Reserve system. And they've gotten us in such horrible debt that there are people now beginning to say, yeah, it looks like it should be. We're going to have to turn over our monetary system to a international body and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of sovereignty. Right there. That's what they plan. How can you stop it? Well, you get the kind of information we've assembled here and explode all over the neighborhood. Right? Get people to read this book. Tell them it will not put them to sleep. It will keep them awake for weeks. What are some of the things that we're spending so much money for? I might point out to you that in 1981, when Ronald Reagan came to office, the federal debt was under $1 trillion. And at the end of 12 years of Republican conservative leadership, it was over $3 trillion. Over $4 trillion, excuse me. It's now $4.5 trillion. And Clinton is going a little bit faster than these others. What are they spending the money for? Well, I got a long list of things here. I'll read a few of them. $2 million to study why truck drivers lose alertness at the wheel. That's important. $49 million for a rock and roll museum. $500,000 to study the effects of cigarette smoking on dogs. It's your money, right? I don't know why you're laughing. You should be crying, right? $225,000 for an onion storage facility at the University of Georgia. $2 million for a bicycle and pedestrian path between Arlington and Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's so the Harvard professors can bike to school. Right? $500,000 to McDonald's Corporation to promote chicken McNuggets. They needed the money, right? $2.3 million to Ernest and Julio Gallo to promote Gallo wines. $50,000 to Paul Newman's company to promote salad dressing. This is hard to believe. And yet it's there. $20 million to the JFK Center for the Performing Arts. Taxpayers throughout the United States are now subsidizing a beautiful theater and a steady stream of performers for the enjoyment of federal employees and D.C. area residents. Other Americans must pay for their own theaters and performers. $1.2 million for African elephant conservation. That must be Republicans that were behind that one. $10 million for the United States Institute of Peace to teach the people to want peace. Do you know anybody that needs to be taught to want peace? Do people start wars? Governments start wars. The great Englishman Richard Cobden said in the middle of the 19th century, he said, peace will come to this world when the people have more to do with each other and their governments less. The man was a bircher. And he didn't even know it. He didn't even know it. Well, we can go on and on. I got a chapter in here. I start off with a quote from Shakespeare. I'm very literary. The quote from The Taming of the Shrew. Shakespeare wrote, "There's small choice in rotten apples." Yes. What are the choices they give us? More debt or world monetary control? And that's the only choice you have. Small choice in rotten apples. What about less government? What about paying off the debt? What about leaving the people's money with the people? They recently started a job creation program. Right? They're taxing you and me to start a job creation program because they know down deep that the last thing on earth you do with your own money is start jobs. That's the last thing any American would do. So they've got to take it from you and start their own jobs. Incredible. I've got 2 separate chapters on inflation. Inflation and increase in the quantity of currency. Period. Stop right there. There's nothing to do with rising prices. That's the effect of inflation. Don't blame the merchant. Don't blame the supermarket. Don't blame anybody else. Inflation, properly defined, an increase in the quantity of currency. Who does it? 2 choices. Government or a counterfeiter. And the government goes after the counterfeiter. It doesn't want any competition. Inflation is thievery, ladies and gentlemen. I talk in the book about a man who received a bequest of $10,000 in 1940. And he didn't trust any bank, so he put it in the bottom drawer of his bureau. And 50 years later, he took it out. In 1940, he could have bought a beautiful home with the $10,000. 50 years later, he couldn't even put a down payment on one. Where did that value go? It was stolen in a process that John Maynard Keynes, the British socialist, said not one man in a million can figure out. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we figured it out. And we've told a lot of more Americans, and it's not true anymore in America. There are many more than a million who can figure it out. But inflation is not just thievery. Inflation can destroy a nation. And it can make the people turn to dictatorship. It can do that as it did in Germany in the 1920s. I've got a section in here where we show photographs of currency going all the way back to the time when we had gold certificates in our country, and it said on them, this certificate is redeemable in gold on demand at any bank in the United States, the U.S. Treasury or any bank. And you could take that piece of paper and you could get real gold for it. And that's gone. And then the U.S. Treasury put out silver certificates, and you could exchange them for silver, and that's gone too. And then back in the 20s, we started getting Federal Reserve notes. And because they operated side by side with the gold certificates, they too said on them, the first of them said gold on demand is available. But when President Roosevelt said you couldn't own gold anymore in 1933, then they put them out and they said, this note is exchangeable for lawful money. And so a man went to a bank with a $50 bill and he plopped it up on the counter and he asked the teller for some lawful money. And the girl said, what do you want, 5 10s or 10 5s? And he said, no, young lady, if you look on those bills that you want to give me, it says on them that it's exchangeable for lawful money as well. And if it's exchangeable for lawful money, it can't be lawful money. I'd like some lawful money. And she said, just a minute, sir. She went and got the boss. Well, they finally told the man that they weren't going to give him what he wanted, gold and silver. And so he took his 50 and he said, thank you, you've confirmed what I already knew, and he walked out the door. And so now the currency you carry in your pocket or purse says on it what? This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, redeemable in nothing. Nothing. In my lifetime, plus 2 years. We have gone from the finest paper money the world has ever known to totally irredeemable paper currency, the amount of which and the value of which is set by a private organization called the Federal Reserve. Where did they ever get the idea for a Federal Reserve? Plank 5 of the Communist Manifesto is the Federal Reserve.